In the summer of 1945, as World War II ground toward its final violent chapter, the United States Navy placed its trust in one of its most seasoned warships, the USS Indianapolis. She was a heavy cruiser, fast and powerful, her steel hull scarred by years of combat across the Pacific. Her crew had faced bombardments, kamikaze attacks, and relentless enemy fire. Many believed they had already endured the worst the war could offer. They were wrong. Although Germany had been defeated, the war against Japan raged on with brutal intensity. American forces were still fighting and dying on islands scattered across the Pacific. Each mile gained came at a terrible cost. Behind the scenes, U.S. leadership searched for a way to end the war without sacrificing hundreds of thousands more American lives. What they devised was a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen, and it had to be delivered in absolute secrecy. The USS Indianapolis was chosen to carry part of that burden. In mid-July, the ship received orders that were classified at the highest level. The crew was told only that the mission was urgent and that the cargo was critical to national security. Crates were loaded under heavy guard. Armed Marines watched them around the clock. No one was allowed near them without authorization. Sailors noticed the tension, the silence, the seriousness of the officers, but they asked no questions. In wartime, obedience was survival. The Indianapolis departed at high speed, cutting through the Pacific alone. No destroyers escorted her. No protective screen surrounded her. Speed was considered her shield. The cruiser broke records on the journey, racing thousands of miles across waters known to be infested with enemy submarines. Yet the ship arrived at Tinian Island on July 26, 1945, without incident. The cargo was unloaded quickly and quietly. The mission, whatever it was complete. Only later would history reveal that the Indianapolis had delivered key components of the atomic bomb, the weapon that would soon change the course of human history. With no time for rest, the ship was immediately ordered to continue on to Leyte in the Philippines. Once again, she sailed alone. Even more dangerously, no orders were given to zigzag, a maneuver that made ships harder targets for submarines. No one explained why. No one questioned it. Life aboard settled into routine. The sea was calm, the sky was clear. Some sailors played cards below deck, laughing and talking about home. Others wrote letters, convinced the war would soon be over. After years of chaos and bloodshed, the stillness felt almost unreal. But war rarely announces itself. Beneath the surface of the Pacific, a Japanese submarine, I-58, was prowling the darkness. Its captain was skilled, aggressive, and searching for American targets. As the Indianapolis cut through the night on July 29th, the submarine detected her silhouette against the horizon. Silent and unseen, it moved into position. There were no alarms, no escorts to raise the warning, no chance to evade. Shortly after midnight on July 30th, 1945, the men aboard the USS Indianapolis continued their watch, unaware that they were already condemned by fate. Within minutes, the calm Pacific night would explode into fire and steel. For hundreds of American sailors, the war was about to follow them into the ocean, and the sea itself would become their greatest enemy. Just after midnight on July 30th, 1945, the USS Indianapolis cut silently through the Pacific. The ocean was calm, the sky moonless, the horizon swallowed by darkness. Most of the crew slept below deck, exhausted after weeks of non-stop operations. Others stood watch, their eyes scanning empty water out of habit more than concern. The war felt distant in that moment. There had been no alerts, no sightings, no warnings of danger. Then the night shattered. At exactly 12:14 a.m., a Japanese submarine, I-58, fired a spread of torpedoes. They raced toward the cruiser unseen, leaving no trace on the surface. Seconds later, The first torpedo slammed into the starboard bow of the Indianapolis. The explosion tore through steel like paper. A massive fireball erupted inside the ship, instantly killing dozens of men who never had a chance to react. Fuel tanks ruptured. Flames surged through passageways. The entire ship shook violently, throwing sailors from their bunks and smashing bodies against bulkheads. Before alarms could fully sound, a second torpedo struck near the ship's center. This blast was even more devastating. It destroyed the engine room, cutting all power in an instant. The lights went out. Radios went dead. The ship was plunged into total darkness. Without electricity, pumps failed and communications collapsed. The Indianapolis was blind, crippled, and mortally wounded. Water rushed into the ship with terrifying speed. Compartments flooded in seconds. Men tried to escape but found passageways blocked by debris and fire. Some were trapped below deck, pounding on sealed hatches as water rose around them. Others were crushed by collapsing steel. Smoke filled the air, burning lungs and blinding eyes. The sounds of screaming, shouting, and exploding ammunition echoed through the darkness. The cruiser began to list sharply. Oil poured into the sea, coating the surface in thick black fuel that burned sailors' skin and eyes. Officers struggled to give orders, but chaos ruled. Lifeboats were smashed or unreachable. There was no organized evacuation, only instinct and panic. Captain Charles McVeigh realized the truth within minutes. The damage was beyond saving. He gave the order to abandon ship. Sailors fought their way through fire and smoke toward the decks. Some jumped into the ocean without life jackets. Others clutched whatever debris they could find. Men burned, bleeding, and blinded, hurled themselves into the water to escape the flames. Those who hesitated were often dragged down with the ship. Just 12 minutes after the first torpedo struck, the USS Indianapolis rolled heavily to starboard. The stern lifted into the air, silhouetted briefly against the night sky, before the ship slipped beneath the surface. Hundreds of men were pulled under by suction, trapped inside flooding compartments, or crushed as the cruiser vanished into the depths. Then suddenly, it was over. The ocean grew quiet. Floating in the dark were nearly 900 American sailors, wounded, exhausted, and terrified. Around them drifted wreckage, oil, and bodies. No distress signal had been received. No rescue ships were on the way. The Navy had no idea the Indianapolis was gone. As the hours passed, the men clung to hope. Surely someone would come. Surely the ship's absence would be noticed. But as dawn approached and the sun rose over an empty horizon, a horrifying realization began to set in. They were not just shipwrecked. They had been abandoned to the open sea, and the ocean was about to turn against them. When the sun rose on July 30th, 1945, it revealed a nightmare that no American sailor was prepared for. Nearly 900 men floated in the open Pacific, scattered across miles of ocean. Some clung to life jackets already soaked in fuel. Others held onto pieces of wreckage that barely kept their heads above water. Many were badly wounded, burned, broken, or bleeding, and there was no medical help coming. The heat came first. The tropical sun beat down relentlessly, turning the ocean into a blinding mirror. Lips cracked, skin blistered, eyes swelled shut. With no fresh water, thirst became unbearable within hours. Men tried to ration hope, believing rescue would come soon. But as the day dragged on, their strength faded. Salt water coated their mouths, making thirst worse with every breath. By the second day, the hallucinations began. Dehydration and exhaustion twisted minds. Some sailors believed they saw ships on the horizon. Others heard voices calling their names. A few became convinced the ocean itself was fresh water. They drank deeply, swallowing salt that poisoned their bodies. Within hours, many lost their grip on reality, screaming, convulsing, slipping beneath the waves. Then the sharks came. At first, the attacks were isolated. A sudden splash, A scream cut short. Blood spread through the water. The predators had been drawn by the explosions, the bodies, the smell of death. They circled endlessly, striking without warning. The wounded were taken first. Those bleeding or drifting alone vanished silently beneath the surface. The men tried to stay together, forming groups for comfort and protection, but panic and despair eroded discipline. Some sailors thrashed wildly, attracting attention. Others drifted away in the night, too weak to fight the current. Every morning, fewer voices answered roll calls that no one officially took. Night offered no mercy. Temperatures dropped sharply after sunset. Men shivered uncontrollably, their muscles cramping from exhaustion. Darkness brought fear. Flares of imagination turned shadows into enemies. Every splash sounded like an approaching fin. Some men prayed aloud. Others whispered goodbyes to families they would never see again. By the third and fourth days, death became routine. Bodies floated among the living. Some sailors held onto their dead friends, unable to let go. Others pushed corpses away in terror. The smell of decay hung in the air. The ocean, once seen as freedom and power, had become a vast, merciless grave. Hope slowly died. Many men accepted that rescue would never come. They stopped fighting. They slipped beneath the surface quietly, choosing exhaustion over terror. The number of survivors shrank hour by hour. Then, on the fifth day, something changed. A distant aircraft passed overhead. At first, no one believed it was real. Hallucinations had already betrayed them too many times. But as the plane circled again, men began screaming, waving, splashing desperately. A lone American pilot spotted the oil slick and bodies below. He radioed for help immediately. Rescue was finally coming. But by the time help arrived, the ocean had already claimed most of the men. Out of nearly 1,200 sailors aboard the USS Indianapolis, only 316 would survive. The rest were gone, taken by thirst, madness, exposure, and the sea itself. And for the survivors, the nightmare was not yet over. When rescue finally came, it was not because alarms were raised, signals received, or commanders acted quickly. It came purely by chance. On the fifth day after the sinking, an American patrol aircraft flying a routine anti-submarine mission noticed something strange below. A long, dark oil slick stretching across the Pacific. As the pilot descended to investigate, he saw debris scattered across the water. Then he saw bodies. And then, horrifyingly, he saw movement. Men were still alive. Breaking protocol, the pilot immediately radioed for help and refused to leave the area. Another aircraft dropped life rafts and supplies. One pilot even landed directly on the open ocean, risking his own life to pull survivors aboard. For the men in the water, it felt unreal. Many believed they were hallucinating again, just as they had for days. Within hours, American ships and aircraft converged on the scene. Sailors were pulled from the water, skeletal, burned by the sun, their skin peeling, their eyes swollen shut. Many were delirious, unable to speak or recognize where they were. Some cried uncontrollably. Others remained silent, staring at nothing, still trapped mentally in the terror of the open sea. Medics treated severe dehydration, saltwater poisoning, infected wounds, and exposure. Survivors were given water carefully, knowing that too much could kill them. Out of nearly 1,200 men who had sailed aboard the USS Indianapolis, only 316 survived. The scale of the loss was staggering. It was the single greatest loss of life in U.S. Navy history from one ship. Yet instead of immediate honor and accountability, the disaster became an embarrassment. Something officials wanted forgotten as quickly as possible, especially with victory over Japan just weeks away. The Navy needed someone to blame. That blame fell on Captain Charles McVay. Despite overwhelming evidence that the Indianapolis had been sent alone, without escort, without sonar support, and without critical intelligence about Japanese submarines operating in the area. McVeigh was charged with negligence. He was accused of failing to zigzag, even though he had not been ordered to do so, and even though visibility that night made zigzagging ineffective. In a deeply controversial decision, the Navy brought the Japanese submarine commander to testify against him. McVeigh was convicted. The verdict crushed him. For years, letters arrived from grieving families, many blaming him personally for the deaths of their sons. The Navy quietly acknowledged internal failures, but never publicly accepted responsibility. Survivors carried unbearable memories, sharks circling at night, men screaming, friends disappearing beneath the water, while the man who commanded them was left to carry the blame alone. In 1968, unable to escape the weight of guilt placed upon him, Captain Charles McVeigh took his own life. For decades, the truth remained buried, but the survivors of the USS Indianapolis refused to let the story end that way. They fought relentlessly to clear their captain's name, telling their story to historians, lawmakers, and anyone willing to listen. Evidence was re-examined. Records were reopened. The facts were undeniable. McVeigh had been made a scapegoat for failures far beyond his control. In the year 2000, more than 50 years after the sinking, Captain Charles McVeigh was officially exonerated by the United States government. No ruling could bring back the dead. Today, the story of the USS Indianapolis stands as one of the most horrifying and important chapters in American military history. These men completed one of the most critical missions of World War II. They endured suffering beyond imagination. They were loyal to the end. They were not defeated by fear. They were tested by the ocean itself. Remembering them is not just about tragedy. It is about truth, accountability, and honoring the American sailors who paid the price of victory in silence and whose sacrifice must never be forgotten.